Will Russia use nuclear weapons in Ukraine? Did Russia threaten to use nuclear weapons on Ukraine? Well, yes. And Moscow had sent this message before, not once, twice, or even 3 times. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in February, and for many years before that, Putin has been rattling the nuclear saber. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022, in what Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, referred to as a special military operation. Russian forces tried to seize Kyiv but were unsuccessful, so they turned their focus to southern and eastern Ukraine, particularly the Donbas region in the east, comprising Luhansk and Donetsk. Ukraine has launched a significant counter-offensive in recent months. The northeast and east of the nation has seen a considerable amount of territory liberated by Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian army reportedly reclaimed land in the Kherson region to the north of the Dnipro River in the south. The southern city of Kherson, which Russia technically claimed to have annexed with the province of the same name only 6 weeks following a disputed referendum, was the subject of a withdrawal announcement from Russia on November 9, 2022. The Ukrainian army liberated the city on November 11, 2022. However, Russia continues to hold control over the larger Kherson region to the south of the Dnipro River. Ukraine claims to have discovered proof of torture and other war crimes committed by Russian forces after Russia withdrew from Kherson. On November 15, 2022, there were concerns about an escalation of the conflict when a missile struck neighboring Poland, a NATO member, killing 2 people. At the time of the G20 conference in Bali, Indonesia, a missile strike took place. At first, it was thought that Russia might have fired the missile. In response, leaders of the G7 nations and NATO members held an emergency meeting on the fringes of the summit, at which they agreed to determine appropriate next steps as the investigation proceeds. Nevertheless, after further examination of the blast site, NATO concluded that there was no indication that it was the product of a planned operation, and that there was no evidence Russia is launching an offensive military campaign against NATO. Initial results of an inquiry led by Poland and the US revealed that Ukrainian soldiers had shot the missile as part of an air defense system against an approaching Russian missile. The incident has brought attention to the danger that the conflict in Ukraine could worsen and turn into a conflict with a neighboring NATO member. According to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty's Collective Defense Clause, such an escalation could lead to a NATO response. Russia is currently estimated to have an arsenal of around 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons. Russia is capable of launching tactical nuclear weapons by air, land, and water. The range of these systems is roughly 500 kilometers. Vladimir Putin has used threats of escalation from the start of the conflict in Ukraine to dissuade Western countries from getting involved. Mr. Putin declared on September 21, 2022, that Russian citizens will be partially mobilized to participate in the conflict in Ukraine. Additionally, he claimed that certain NATO members have spoken out in favor of using weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, against Russia. If any strikes were launched on Russian soil in defense of Ukraine, he threatened to escalate the conflict. Russia declared that it would employ every weapon system at its disposal to defend its people if its territorial integrity was threatened. This is not a bluff. President of the United States Joe Biden charged Vladimir Putin on October 6, 2022 of saber-rattling on the use of nuclear weapons. According to Mr. Biden, any tactical nuclear weapon deployment runs the risk of escalating into a full nuclear exchange. He declared, "I don't think there's any way to use a tactical nuclear weapon easily and not have Armageddon happen." Vladimir Putin's military failures in Ukraine have sparked worries that he would use nuclear weapons to break a deadlock or avert danger. The moment of maximum danger in the Ukraine war would come if and when Russia faces a large-scale defeat and there was a threat to Putin's grip on power. On the one hand, nuclear risk must be taken seriously. We must keep in mind that it is challenging to find a scenario in which Russia uses nuclear weapons that do not have a negative outcome for the country and Putin. The majority of experts feel that there's a low likelihood that Russia will use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but that likelihood may increase if Russia was facing the possibility of suffering a big military defeat. the Royal United Service Institute's Dr. Siddharth Kaushal and Sam Cranny-Evans assert that the employment of TNWs in Ukraine is unlikely, save in the unlikely scenario that Russian forces are routed to the extent that Ukraine can reclaim Crimea. Ben Wallace, the UK's Minister of State for Defence, recently reaffirmed the UK's support for Ukraine before the House of Commons on October 20, 2022. He declared that NATO countries' commitment to aiding Ukraine was unwavering. When it comes to the nuclear debate, the narrative always maintains that Russia would face serious repercussions if it used tactical nuclear weapons. According to a report from the 23rd of October 2022, Russia said that Ukraine was considering using a radioactive dirty bomb on its soil. The assertion was disputed by US officials as a false flag operation by Russia. Russian President Joe Biden responded to the accusations by saying that using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine would be an extremely serious mistake. Vladimir Putin reportedly stated during a gathering of foreign policy specialists on October 27, 2022, that he saw no need to use nuclear weapons on Ukraine. There is no value to that, neither politically nor militarily. According to AP News, he also stated Moscow's unsubstantiated claim that Ukraine was preparing a false flag strike using a radioactive dirty bomb that it would try to blame on Russia. On October 31, 2022, James Cleverly, the UK's Foreign Secretary, gave the House of Commons an update on the conflict in Ukraine. Regarding Russia's prospective nuclear use, he said, "No other country is talking about nuclear use. No nation is putting President Putin or Russia in danger. He should make it quite clear that any use of nuclear weapons would profoundly alter the nature of this conflict for the UK and our allies. There would be severe consequences for Russia." On November 2, 2022, it was revealed that senior Russian military officials had discussed how and under what conditions Russia could use a TNW in Ukraine, according to a US intelligence assessment. The assessment, created by the National Intelligence Council, is analysis rather than raw intelligence, so it's not a high-confidence product. Because of this, some government officials think the conversations captured in the document may have been misinterpreted and do not necessarily prove that Russia's getting ready to use a nuclear weapon. According to the report, it is unlikely that President Putin participated in the conversations detailed in the intelligence assessment. Some observers felt it was significant that China had agreed to the G20 Leaders' Declaration, which included a condemnation of the war in Ukraine, after the G20 summit in Bali ended on November 16, 2022. It stated that the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is unjustifiable. Speaking after the summit, French President Emmanuel Macron said China had an important role in putting pressure on Russia to avoid the use of nuclear weapons. However, Putin's nuclear blackmail has presented various fresh explanations as to why Putin is not about to deploy nuclear weapons. Since late September, Russia has been deploying hundreds of thousands of soldiers to Ukraine, and Putin wouldn't want to take the chance of a nuclear blast causing their deaths. Not at the moment, at least. Alright guys, that wraps up our video for today. If you found this video useful, please give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more.